The pit.
Yeah, so I coached down there because I
Turn the meeting
was
over
freshman.
to Steve, co-chair Rick Highland.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'd like to start off with, if everybody would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to start off with just an introduction of everybody, go right around the table, so our guests know who's who, and I'll start right over here.
Steve Knox, co-chair Albany.
Matthew Flash, representative for Carroll County.
Paul O'Brien, Selectman Wolfboro.
Bill Gassman from Baltimore.
Kelly Collins, Town Administrator, Wakefield.
Chuck.
Chuck Henderson, Senator, Schuman's office.
Mary Cronin, Madison.
Glenn Koppelman, representing North Country Council.
Denise Roy Palmer with Waco, the Wentworth Economic Development Corporation.
John Gallagher, Selectman from Potts Location.
Rich Thacker, Selectman from Brookfield.
Jeff Bradley, Senate District 3.
Pat Farley from Tamworth, but representing Lake Region Planning.
Jerry Knorr, House District 3 in Carroll County.
And I'm Rick Highland, co-chair with Steve Knox.
John Border, Eaton.
Yes.
I'm John Border from Eaton.
Yes.
Come on up and sit at the table.
Yeah.
Oh, it's,
We have a chair right here for you.
it's crowded. That's
Huh?
This is fine. I can see better from here.
Is there anybody we've missed? And represent? Okay, thank you all for coming.
We have some new representatives to the committee that I'd like to point out. Mary Cronin is representing Madison, and she's one of our librarians on the committee. We also have representatives now from Ossipee. Joy Gagnon and her husband Gary Gagnon will be our reps. I don't know who's the alternate, who's the rep yet, but we'll find out shortly. And we're still waiting to hear from Jackson and Bartlett.
Matt is also a new representative.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm trying to work in the crowd. Okay. And Matt Platch he's our rep from Carroll County. He's representing the commission at our meeting. Okay. And at this point, I would like to introduce Karam Judag and Fletcher Kittredge from GWI. Steve and I met with Karam several weeks ago. We had a good conversation. They're very interested in our county-wide effort, and we thought it would be prudent to get them in to talk with us about what they have to offer us and answer any questions that we may have. And Steve already asked 200 questions.
But I've got another 200.
So, without further ado, you're up.
Thank you so much for having us. It's an honor. I have an emotive connection to New Hampshire. I'm a graduate of UNH. My son goes to Plymouth State. I'm a very part-time resident of Jackson, so we should encourage Jackson to.
We should.
We should.
I like that.
I've been hiking in the White Mountains for about 30 years, so it's good to be here. I think it may make sense, this is a conversation, a relaxed conversation, so it may make sense for us just to give you a 5-minute overview of GWI, who we are, what we do, and I'll lead off and I'll have Fletcher kick in. We've been around for 25 years. We celebrate our 25th year this August. We service all 16 counties in Maine. We were the first ones to bring up dial-up, the first ones to bring up DSL, the first ones to bring up fiber. Fletcher and his work translated to what's called the three-ring binder in Maine, which is the middle mile backbone, built in 2009, 2010. Our livelihood and our passion in life is to connect up communities to fiber, because we believe that you should have a choice in having options. We believe gigabit fiber is the basis for 21st century civilization. believe it should be affordable. We are maniacal about data privacy and security. We're maniacal about net neutrality. These are things we have taken positions on even at the federal level. We champion communities to the hilt. We believe in participation. We believe it should be affordable to all. And that's what drives us every day when we get up to do what we do. In Maine, we are known for our customer service. So we have a full company. We're located in Biddeford. We have crews everywhere in Maine. We have some small presence in New Hampshire, and we want to be able to augment and amplify it. But we are a full-scale internet service provider. We provide voice, telephone service, and fairly soon, hopefully, we will get into some video too. So we do all sales support. We do all support ourselves. You can call us anytime, 24/7, 365. There's always a human being answering the phone. We pride ourselves on that. We pride ourselves in working with communities. Our goal is to understand what are your needs for the network you would like to have, what kind of challenges we would like the network to solve, whether it be remote working, distance learning, telehealth, because the value of the network at the end of the day is when you use it, and we want to learn and listen, how would you like to use it? And we've done a lot of work in Maine with communities, in rural communities. I'll let Fletcher give you a sense of some of those large-scale projects that we've done, and hopefully we can share some learnings that we have had and some tools that we have in our arsenal to be able to discuss with you and see how we can wire up Carroll County all together. Can't do it by ourselves, but we can do it together.
So we've been doing this for 25 years. I grew up in Maine and went to college there, and then went down to Cambridge, Massachusetts in the early 80s and joined a research lab and became a graduate student. The research lab I joined just happened, and the project I was on happened to be building the original internet.
Who was that?
Bolt, Brannick, and Newman, BBN. Oh, neat. What division?
I was in the executive office.
Okay.
I worked for George and Rice.
Oh, wow. Gotta check out your name again. So I did that, and then when the privatized the internet, when ordinary people could start using it in the early 90s, I saw it as a way to get back to Maine, and started a company so I could have a job, and we've been doing it ever since. I think a key event was at the end of the Great Recession. There was a stimulus package, and we got a $25 million grant to build a $32 million open access middle mile network that runs around the state of Maine. It's called the three-ring binder. It's 1,100 miles, and it's called the three-ring binder because it's 3 rings, and it binds the state together. So it hits, it's primarily in rural Maine. It traverses about 250 of the 500 towns in Maine. And the ones that aren't on it tend to be the urban areas that are well served. So it goes through a lot of rural towns, and it has been it's got some good points and some bad points, but it really has become a huge part of the network in Maine, and is used by many rural towns. Lots of them, probably still, definitely still a minority, but dozens of towns have gotten fiber networks using that network as a way to get in and out of town. It comes over into New Hampshire. There was another project later and crosses in Freiburg and Bethel. And I think on the Bethel side, the two networks come right up to each other but don't quite compete. But it's middle mile is how you get from it's the interstate. It's how you get from your town to the outside world. And it is a major factor. And I'm also I'm an outgoing board member of ValleyNet, EC Fiber ValleyNet, and Carroll Monroe here, that I hope many of you know, who's the, is your new role been officially announced?
Yes.
Okay, is the new chairman of ValleyNet, which is the nonprofit that runs the network, designs, builds, and operates EC Fiber's network, and for other towns now. One of the things that EC Fiber, which is a really remarkable 24-town, we call them utility districts in Maine. I'm not sure if it's a municipally controlled, essentially utility district, which provides broadband for 24 towns, and the service there will be universal. Probably about, what you say, 2/3 of the way through the build out.
Yeah, we're just over 1,000 miles of 1,400.
Yeah. Okay. So even better than that. But one of the things that EC Fiber struggles with is lack of good middle mile access for an otherwise absolutely sterling network. We've been building fiber for about 12 years now, and a lot of that work has been with towns, and we got into doing it with towns in the early days, and there wasn't a real model that everyone used at that time. So we've tried all sorts of different things. In some places, the town has gone out and bonded and built. Using people like GWI, we helped them with it. They basically had their own network built and funded by taxpayer funds, and to some extent still subsidized through taxpayer funds. And I'm thinking of the town of Carroll, which is a town that's a set of islands off the coast of Maine, about 3 miles off the coast. And they provide universal gigabit service to every residence and business in town. And it's available to everyone, and 90% of the population takes it. It's been operational for a couple of years, so after 2 years, it's referred to as the penetration rate is 90%. A big part of that is there are no options, and the reason they were willing to fund this in the manner that they did, there were basically 2 reasons. The first is they saw it as an existential crisis. We have really become a network-dependent society, and communities that don't have broadband, what we're seeing is that they fade away. And this was an island that was literally looking at the fact that they could not retain school-age population, so they were going to lose their school, and if they lost the school, inevitably that's the ultimate death knell to towns. And what they were looking at is becoming just a summer community where there were no year-round residents. They built this network, and it's been highly successful. So the first reason they funded it themselves is it was an existential crisis. The other was they have a lot of very wealthy residents, or they're not residents, summer homeowners, summer people, and multi-million-dollar estates. A-list celebrities have summer homes there. And the summer people were quite willing to essentially pay for the network through their taxes, because they're dependent on the network, and their ability to use their summer place was limited to some extent by not having network access. They charge $365 a year for gigabit access. And the reason they charge it annually is so the summer people can't buy it for a couple months and turn it off. You know, that works out to $60 a year, $30 a month. And for those who cannot afford that, which is, there's, the town subsidizes through a charity fund they have. So that's one way of doing it. In other places, such as South Portland, we have, the town wanted to connect their buildings together, a municipal network being, for the internal purposes of it. This is a city, a small city, about 20,000 people. They wanted to tie the buildings together. So, and they've been doing it by the cable company. The cable company significantly jacked up their rates, and they said, wait a minute, we're a town, we can take a long view. If we essentially build the network ourselves, we're going to end up ahead after, say, 5 years. So they put it out to bid. We were both the low bidder, but I think what really attracted them is we said, look, we're going to build this network for cost. Our purpose is to actually serve your residents and businesses. So we're not only going to serve your town buildings, but we'll also make, anybody can connect up to this network. And also we'll build an open access network, which an open access network basically means that you don't have a monopoly. You make available on reasonable terms that motivates people to use your network, the network to other people. And we first did that in 2014, I think. And every year since then, it started out with just a few miles because it was the town center. Every year since then, we've extended it. And basically, we have a network that reaches essentially a backbone that reaches throughout the town, and we're starting the process now of building out the individual neighborhoods and an organic process that is going to lead to eventually us serving the entire town. Then let's see, and we've done that model in about 3 or 4 different towns: Brunswick, Ellsworth. That was a little different in Ellsworth. Augusta. And then in Sanford, they went for federal funding through a block grant, economic development, EDA block grant, and that's about $1.5 million project, and they were not on the 3-ring binder. The 3-ring binder, basically, they got screwed. And our first conversation is when I got to go to the town, I said, I'm really sorry that you guys got left off. So they're the only major town that wasn't, and they just as the highway passed them by, the superhighway passed them by, so they decided that they needed to get connected so they could have the same advantages, and their drive was to keep the businesses and grow their businesses. It was a business focused. So they built working with us and others, built a 35-mile network that connects them to the 3-ring binder, and then is a ring around the hitting up the vast majority of our businesses. And that went live this year, and they are already looking to extend it to more parts of the town. Having said all that, and we are in some ways a for-profit ValleyNet, in that we also build, design, and operate. We have decided through our experience to add an F to that, which is finance, design, build, and operate. And we're very interested in bidding on various components. If you go the EC fiber route. What we've found is two things. One is there are lots of towns that just can't do it for a variety of reasons. You all are significantly ahead of many places that have just as much need, but they don't have the ability to build the consensus the way you all have, and have people drive the process. Most people, most towns, I mean, the poorer the town is, the less resources they have, and it's people resources as well as other things. So it's not going to work everywhere. It's also takes a long time to do these things. We've been involved in a lot of them, and it seems like 4 to 5 years is about how long it takes from start to finish, and most of that is around work that you've probably already done around organizing, so you probably are a few years into that process, but still it takes a long time. So for that, and then the second reason is the availability of federal funding. So we have moved over the last year, or 18 months, into the process of obtaining federal funding and doing it that way. And we're thick in the heart of that. And in that model, we go out and we apply for federal funds, either low interest loans or grants. The vast majority of it is so far it's about 90-10, a loan to grants. But the loans are very attractive terms. They're better than you would get as a municipality, and we're in the process of then building out networks to people based on that. That process is a major pain, and it's difficult to qualify for the loans, and it's time consuming and a pain process to apply for them. And we're just and we've been told that the procurement process that brings with it is going to be painful. But having gone through the process of that, we did this thinking, given the amount of money that's involved, that we were just applying for one time. That we're gonna once we get through the process. And we set ourselves up so we qualify for the loans, and we learn the process, that we're going to turn the crank every year. So right now, that's our intention. The first loan we applied for was a year ago, and we're in the season where they're telling us now people are being told who doesn't get the loans. And so it takes that amount of time, and the window is closed now. It will be opening up in the new year, and we have every intention to apply again, and would love to be able to find someplace outside the state of Maine so we can stop just being a Maine company. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you all. The EC fiber model is really great, and it has a lot of advantages, and what we're doing is also a good model, and it also has a lot of advantages. I think one of the differences is, one of the differences is that when the town owns things, you kind of have a monopoly, but it's a different type of monopoly. And one of the things I think is that the nation has not been well served by having private monopolies provide these services. Again, we are becoming a network dependent society, and it's going to get the dependency is going to grow all the time. And having a key resource where you have an essentially unregulated private entity manage it or own it is a real problem. You can't have a key resource that you depend on, that someone else controls, and they can wring as much money as possible out of you or provide bad service and you have no choices. And having the town there, you get a different dynamic. It's still a monopoly, and since many of you are in town government, you know that public institutions, sometimes they work really great, and sometimes you end up in a situation where the people who are plowing the roads or whatever put their interests ahead of the public. But it is a heck of a lot better than having a private entity. So that's great. From what I've seen so far, there are two problems with the EC fiber model, one of which you don't have. And the first is it takes a lot of energy and input from the citizens to get the bootstrap the thing up. And the second problem is it's more expensive, and that can end up with an effect on prices. So the reason it's more, the two reasons it's more expensive. One is lack of scale, and even if you all band together, you're not going to be that big, and there are going to be a bunch of costs that are going to have to be spread out over the number of users, and you're just not going to have that many users. The second is the cost of money is higher if you're using the federal funding. So when I think of EC Fiber and what they have to charge to make the bondholders happy at this point, it's about roughly 50% more. I think between 30 and 50% more than what we can charge. Having been on the board and knowing the sorts of things that have to get done to maintain bond covenants, it's just what you have to do. Even though EC Fiber ValleyNet is an extremely efficient organization, we always are looking at them and saying, geez, their staff is so small and they get so much done. It's still hard because they've got to have a person who fulfills a role, even if they've only got 4,000 customers versus a larger number. That's an issue, but you really ought to look at both models. The larger you make, and I think one of the things that I think ValleyNet really demonstrates is the larger. I know it's incredibly hard. I mean, we have these school districts in Maine which are just unbelievably painful. It's very difficult for towns to work together because the different towns are so different, and so their interests can diverge. The bigger, to the extent that you can pull it off, the bigger you make your organization, the lower the costs are going to be, the lower potential the prices in the long run can be. The other thing I should say about EC Fiber is the bonds that they floated were relatively short term, and that's what the market required. With longer term bonds, particularly with low interest rates, you don't need as much money to pay them off, particularly in the beginning. EC Fiber in the long run is going to benefit from that, and though their prices are high now, and which I think impacts their take rate, I don't know if Carroll can talk about take rate or not. I certainly can. But the higher the price, the fewer people can want to use it or can afford it. In the long run, being a town-owned, their prices should come down significantly when the bonds are paid off. It would be my guess, and I'm not on the board anymore, and even if I was, I couldn't say, but there is that potential. As long as the towns don't treat the network as a revenue opportunity too excessively. Because at some point, it's a great flywheel of cash that's spinning up, and will generate a lot of cash in the long run. That's what strikes me about the two models. But I would say what we see that is just this absolute explosion in fiber, building fiber networks to towns like you, either through because of the Valley, people are seeing ValleyNet and EC Fiber and what they've done, and there's a viable model. Certainly, because of the large amount of federal funding that's coming in, and because even private investors are starting to look at this much more differently after we're 5 or 10 years in, and they can see, yeah, these things generate a lot of cash even in more rural areas, and that's happening too. So I am very optimistic from what I see about the likelihood of getting world-class networks out to small New England towns.
No, I was just going to add that in Maine, with all the work that we have done, there is a quote-unquote a playbook of how you progress in stages to be able to realize municipal broadband or community broadband or public-private partnerships. It may make sense to have a learning from those experiences, at least in Maine, over the last 10 years. That playbook comes in really handy in terms of methodically organizing what you've already done, but also then thinking through what are the next steps, and that may include, surveying. If that, what kind of surveying? How do you do a needs analysis? What do you do, like a gap analysis? From that surveying, then what do you want to move to? Do you want to move towards a preliminary design? And if you do so, what kind of an RFP should be created? How should that RFP be offered? Once that preliminary design is done, what should be the next step? And how do you get private companies then to help and work with the community to do a full-scale design? Once that happens, how does that broadband, call it community, county-wide plan, then be used in a way that makes sense for companies like us to leverage and ask for federal dollars? I did share with Rick, and you're more than welcome to share it with the group, but in Maine, there's a fairly large county, like Carroll County, called Franklin County, that, just like you, got organized. They got a grant from the state that they matched dollar to dollar from the contribution from each town. Ironically, there were 26 towns, all 26 contributed. They spent 2 years working on this plan. The document is available. I hope you guys get a chance to read it. It's very comprehensive, but they went in stages. They went and did a survey town by town. Then they did a survey of the existing infrastructure. Then they did an understanding and a need analysis of what does the county want in terms of an infrastructure that accomplishes certain goals. And they identified those goals. Once they identified those goals, they did a very large survey after that. So if you look at the document, there are various sections to it. There's a very large community participation section, which is not just the surveying, but the multiplicity of the town hall meetings they had where individuals contributed their perspective. The key one being the actual speeds that they get today. And that's really important because that's the data that we use as a way to articulate this is the need that exists out there. So one of the things that we have been able to use that massive study for is the federal funds that are available. They usually fall into these two very large buckets. One bucket says the data that you use to qualify this area is contingent on the FCC maps.
Which you all know are broken.
Which you all know are broken. They're erroneous, deleterious, so that's one big bucket, and that's a very large bucket. And we fight that every day, trying to convince the FCC that you've got to just update these maps. And that's a process. So that's one. There's another bucket which says, we understand these maps are broken, so why don't you tell us what the actual speeds are? Assert that from community and yourself. And now we will go and actually double check that. And if you're telling us the truth, hallelujah. If you're not, we're gonna hold you accountable and tell you why you're not, and then prove the fact that you got something wrong. We like that bucket because that's something that, working with the communities, we can actually collect that data and say, this is what it really, really is on the ground. And once you have that fact, now other things sort of bloom and open from that kind of funding opportunity. So that all happens because of the community participation, especially at the county-wide level. When you have that massive data, you know, as much of a pain in the rear it is with the federal government and working through those processes, it becomes a little less friction, a little more frictionless. Because now you have people participating and saying, this is real, it's not something we made up. Not to mention, that's also a tool the county and participants in that RFP process can use if somebody says, like the incumbents, you know, we actually provide service. Well, here is the data. So if you do, that's great. So let's talk about the actual on-the-ground data. So it gives you another tool to be able to access those kind of large-scale funds. Furthermore, because of that data set, making and building and operating the network, you get to optimize it because you know where things need to go, right? So we get questions. So you know, I have a driveway 3/4 of a mile long into the woods, or you know, I'm in a trailer. Can I get that connection if you build this? And we have an honest conversation. We say, well, it depends on what you would like, and let's talk about that cost because there's a certain cost to getting it everywhere. So if you know where the speeds are, and if you know where the citizens are, you may say, I can get to 99% in this fashion with this cost structure. That 1% that's an outlier, how do we work together with the town or the county to get them that last piece of the puzzle? The other thing the House of the Speeds does is that we overlay the socioeconomic data that, you know, we plow through census data like breakfast, which is not advisable all the time. But the reason is we want to do that is because we truly, truly, truly believe that there is a segment of population, and I'm sure it's here, in Maine it's about 15%, that's at or below the poverty line. You cannot build a network to everybody and forget that population. It's not fair, it's immoral, and it's unethical. But we need to do it in a way so that it's also affordable to them. So how do we make it affordable? And so one of the goals that we have is working with the county, working with the towns to say, if we build this network and we got it to them and it's affordable, what kind of services would they want? And we have come to the conclusion they need to get equivalent services. So if their affordability rate is $20 a month, they should not be just getting a 30x3 service or a 10x1 service. They should be getting 100x100, whatever that service level is, because they need to get this same level of equality. And it's our job to make sure that we're not unnecessarily, unintentionally contributing to an even greater economic divide. So we need to participate in that. So that kind of a data set comes out from that county analysis. And it's hard work, it's grunty, it's gritty, but it needs to get done. Otherwise, you put yourself back in the soup of 20, 30 years from now, we're having the same conversation and saying, well, you know, there's a segment of our populace that's not participating in the 21st century. And we want to be able to avoid that. So that playbook comes in very, very handy in that sense.
Okay, a few things. First of all, a key point I should have made about the EC fiber model, which you may all understand already, but just in case there are people other, it is revenue bonds and it is not backed by the full faith and credit of the towns. So the towns control it. But if for whatever reason it didn't work out, the towns would not be on the hook. The only recourse for the bondholders is the revenue generated by the network. Two, it is much easier for a company like ours to access federal funding, but it is also possible for some programs for entities like EC Fiber to access federal funding. When Karen talks about the bucket with the bad maps and the bucket with the that lets you use real data, the bucket with the bad maps is FCC, The FCC in the bucket, the good bucket is the USDA. And we've just been doing USDA. And I could go into more details about federal funding for care, but I think it's really interesting, important information that you all understand at some point, but it also can take a little time right now. So let me know. Ask questions later if you want. To get back to what Karen said, all those good social aspects are and ethical and all that is true with having a network that's affordable by anyone. But I would point out there's very practical reasons to do that. The first is the benefit benefits to society if not everyone's on the Superior network are limited. If a town could count on being able to deliver service because everybody has 100 megabits or gigabit, the town could do things in more efficiently because they could do that. I mean, you can stream meetings or whatever. That's particularly true when it comes to delivery of education, which is a traditional major responsibility of towns. Probably school budgets tend to be the biggest. You can't have it. I think you're setting yourself up for trouble if you have a situation where 10% of your kids, everybody else has great access and 10% of your kids don't. You really can't use it in instruction, and that's a problem. I mean, I guess already there's a real problem with the quote-unquote homework gap. Finally, just in terms of cost to society, the people who benefit the most, who have the most potential benefit from a Superior network are the people at the lowest end of the society. Their ability to access to work, to access education, to access social services is greatly enhanced. And the cost to society, the cost benefits to society of raising those people up are because, that's the most expensive part of society for the rest of society to service. So there's just an inherent and profound benefit in doing that. So all that's true, but another thing that's true is what we're talking about is referred to as digital inclusion, which making sure everyone has, for some base level of technology, everybody has access. A very related problem is digital literacy, and it doesn't do any good to give someone access to technology if they don't know how to use it, and they don't know how to find a job using it, if they don't know how to access education or whatever using it. And the thing about digital, and I believe that towns have a major role, as do we, in promoting digital literacy. But the thing about digital literacy is everybody needs it. I have 2 advanced degrees in computer science from Harvard. I spend all day, why can't I get this thing to work? Or how do I do this? How do I do that? But it's a big role. It's not enough. This is not a job. This is going to be, I believe, an ongoing responsibility of towns, because towns traditionally have had 2 responsibilities: local infrastructure and local education. And the technical infrastructure, you're not just going to build a network once and it will be done. There's going to be an ongoing need, A, and B, it's educating people about these sorts of things is as important as the other forms of education people get.
Just one thing. When I introduced these gentlemen here, I forgot to let you know who they actually are, which impressed us at the get-go, because they seeked us out. We didn't seek them out when Steve and I originally met with them. Fletcher is the CEO and founder of GWI, and Carroll is the president and COO of GWI. I just wanted to make that point, and at that point, I'll open it up to any questions. Jerry?
I just on something you were just speaking about a few moments ago, but I want to get into the weeds a little bit. You talked about the discussion of using the FCC maps, which are useless or based on actual speed of service. When we look at how we gather that, I wanted to figure out how do we really gather that. We have, in the last meeting, and that's attachment 2 of the minutes, talked about the information for feasibility and planning, and are still stuck on the RFIs to get the FCC 25 down, 3 megabytes up. But we all know that even if you're served with that, there are times your internet runs a heck of a lot slower than that. And so when you want to gather this data, real data of actual speed of service, are you doing internet speed tests at these locations? How
Yes.
do you pull that off?
Please cut me off because I
want to know how you
tend
do
to go
that.
on and on.
That's great.
I want to just set some background. Everybody at this point, across the political spectrum, across all organizations, understands the FCC data is bad, and that includes the FCC executive. So they are starting a new process. Unfortunately, it's not going to be ready for another 12 months to try to get more accurate speeds. And it looks like the new process answers many of the criticisms. And one of the things for at least some of their stuff that they're doing is they're taking times of day into account. So they're saying it's not enough that you could show at 3 a.m. this person gets all the speed but time of day matters. And they are also doing something which is, to answer your question, the sort of thing we're doing, which is they're opening up for what's called crowdsourcing. And if you're not familiar with the term crowdsourcing, it means gathering data from the crowd, having individual people report the data rather than going out and having a census or having the ISPs report, which was the big problem right now. They say, well, how fast is service there? And Consolidated or whatever the cable company is will say, oh, it's really fast.
Awesome.
Yeah, right, exactly. So they're moving away from that. There are, and the notion, there's a lot of good things. They're moving away from reporting on census blocks where all right, so they're not doing that. They're using GIS maps, shape files. They're allowed crowdsourcing and they're allowing time of day. And the crowdsourcing is what we've been using. And it is, data is impeachable because you can say, so-and-so did a speed test, but their kids were running, streaming, they're playing games, and someone else was streaming and all that, and you can't trust that test. The answer has been, and that is true. It's a valid complaint. You can't. But it's probably actually the most accurate data because there's so much of volume. So many people do speed tests. And there are millions and millions and millions of data points. And you can say you get a pretty good sense, even if individual data is accurate, and overall it's good, A, and B, it's much more dependable when you say it's relative. And I can't stress enough, relative speed, I believe, is the most important measure. It doesn't matter how fast it is in Carroll County. As long as it's as fast as it is in Boston and New York and Portland, Maine, you're not going to be at a societal disadvantage because everybody, you got the same speeds as everybody else. So you can say, look at how fast it is in urban areas and look at how fast it is in Carroll County. People are used to running their business or whatever, all those sorts of things. And in a fast place, they move to Carroll, they're going to be at disadvantage.
Okay. Staying in the weeds though.
Okay, yeah.
Getting this data,
Yeah.
because I think we tend in this group to be a relatively impatient group. We got some good leaders who have been pushing us along. to wait for a year, hope, when the FCC finally gets our act together and does something, and then starts gathering data. But you said this is what we've been using, so you're present tense in that. How
we've
can
been
we
using
use
crowdsourcing.
that to be able to do our crowdsourcing and get that data now as we go through this process rather than RFIs? Is there a way that we can,
Yes.
I mean, do you provide a uniform speed test to everybody so they know what it is? Ask them to do it? How do you get out the word to all the people to do it? How do you get the data back? So I don't want to stay in the weeds.
Carroll does that.
So, yeah, so there are a couple of layers. First, you have to reach out and educate, right? And that repetition through meetings, social media, mailers helps. And that is an education of the importance of it and also how do you carry out the speed test. So because an accurate speed test is what you're getting into your house. It's not over your Wi-Fi, which tends to complicate things. Right? So, and that's a subtlety because you may be, even today, you may get a gigabit service into your home, but if you've got something crappy from Linksys and you're not getting what you want, you know, that can cloud all sorts of judgment. So for example, when we say on our fiber networks today, we say we guarantee your speed, we have a small guideline saying how do we actually guarantee it? And also the fact that, you know, if we guarantee it, we're actually guaranteeing it also over your Wi-Fi because we give them something that will get them what they're actually paying for. So, you know, technology exists out there. We're not the only brainiacs who figured that technology exists. Whether or not you want to use it, it's up to them. So that's one level of education. The other one is there are methods available to you as a county that you can actually get speed. So there's an organization called MLab. We can send you all that information, right? So you can talk to MLab. So the important thing is, remember, the data that goes into from crowdsourcing should be private and secure, right? So if you're going to share that with other people, you have to make absolutely sure that that data remains private and secure, and that what you're sharing is on an aggregate level. So when we ask for the county to give us data, we're making sure we don't want names and address. We don't want that, right? Or if we do it ourselves and somebody asks for it, we aggregate it. We're not giving anybody's information.
Right, so the county, if we put it together and the county asks for it, we'll say, here it is, but it's not going to have any names or addresses. Right. And we're not interested in getting your data that has name and addresses on it.
So you would do this for us? That's what
we can. So if you do it, there's an organization, you can use MLab.
Right.
If we do it, we use our infrastructure to get that speed test, which is pretty much the same infrastructure as MLab or another one called Hoopla. And we'll get that. We talk with people and say, you need to do it 3 times a year, you know, because you want the average data set. We'll take that data, analyze the data, and then we'll say, okay, their average speed from essentially the spigot is this, in this location.
But the bottom line is, if we want to work with you, we can give you that job.
It's also something, depending on your capabilities as well. MLab is a academically led nonprofit consortium that they don't do the work, but they supply you with all the tools.
Is it EMLAP?
Little m, capital L-A-B. And, you know, and you know, just send us questions and we'll.
And the state of Maine uses them. So the state of Maine has an entity called Connect Maine.
Yeah.
So starting last year, after a lot of encouragement and planning, so they put this on the Connect Maine website where citizens can report what they're doing.
Right.
So they go through the MLab. So the way the state of Maine is organizing it, if you look at the Excel file, there's no names, but it gives you an address range or where that data was collected. And the data is saying it's less than 25 by 3. So it's not actual one because they want to keep that specific. So you can do it a whole bunch of different ways of how you want to organize that data. One last caveat. For us, you know, you were talking about the 25 by 3. So for us, the definition of broadband is not 25 by 3. You know, it's just not.
What is it?
It's
100 by 100.
100 by 100 today. And you can get 100 by 100 on a gigabit network, which means in 20 years, if you want a gigabit by gigabit, it's actually 940 by 940, you'll get it. And if 50, 60, 70 years from now, if that fiber optic cable is still there, by changing the electronics on either end, you'll get even more.
Yeah.
So that's how we want to think, because whether it's our money or it's your money, it has to survive generations. So we do not buy into this notion of, you know what, if you get 25 by 3, congratulations, you got broadband, it'll be good for the next 15 years.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't work that way for us.
And I think you all probably already know this, but the asymmetry in speeds is a technology artifact. The cable and DSL were both developed when the model was broadcasting television. And that's not how, at least in our experience, it's used in rural environments. There's so many people who have home businesses or telecommute at least part of the time now, and that's happening more and more. And they really need the symmetry. Because if you're having broadcast, if the world's talking to you and you're just having things broadcast at you, asymmetry is okay. But when you need to talk to the world, and usually economic activity involves that part of it, then you really need symmetry. Okay.
Becky had her hand up.
Okay.
A couple of questions. One, we were sort of, as a group, had sort of said we don't want the taxpayer really funding this. So is your business interested in private investment as well as grants and?
Yes.
So you would accept private
Yes.
investors in with a return?
And I hear that, and I just want to stress that the Easy Fiber model, it's not funded by the taxpayer, except for maybe indirectly if you take the time that town officials use in these meetings. But other than that, it's funded by the ratepayers. So it's a revenue bond, and it's when people pay their bill for their internet access, because this generates money. I mean, that's what makes it different than a road or any of that stuff. People in the U.S. are used to paying a user fee for their internet access. So the short answer to your question is yes, we're interested in that. But I think that I just want to make sure you understand that both models don't have the taxpayers paying for it through their taxes.
All right, now I saw a bunch of hands.
Steve,
I don't know
I
who
have
was
just
first.
one more question.
All right, you got a follow-up? Go ahead.
You were talking about gradients of income, low income, whatever, and you said you used the census. Well, I know after looking at the census data, after looking at the 2018 census data for our state, in our area, there is only one area that's listed as a lower income, being less than $22,000, and that's a small little segment of Berlin, New Hampshire. I know our population is much lower income on that based on our, it's gonna sound weird, but based on our free and low income meals to the school.
So,
can we use that data instead of census
absolutely.
data?
So we use the census data for planning purposes.
Okay.
For subsidies, I think you're absolutely right. We ought to use an existing poverty measure. And I think free and reduced lunch would be one of them. That covers a portion of the population, but then there are other federal poverty measures that you want to look at. And you know, our thought on for the network, I mean, you can do anything with the network that you funded, but for what we funded, what we're hoping is we would come up with an agreed upon measure for that, and that we would provide part of the subsidy, and either the town or the state would provide, or hopefully at some point the federal government would provide the other part. And for other services such as telephone and heat and things like that, the subsidy has come from the federal government or the state governments, and I think that that's the natural place for it to end up. It's just there's more work that needs to be done in legislatures.
I just wanted to mention, New Hampshire did do a broadband crowdsourcing mapping thing for UNH about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
That infrastructure still exists. I'm not sure on their end what they have to be able to bring that back up, but it's already there, and it's already data from that time, at least.
Yeah, and so we, that was probably, I'm pretty sure that was funded through the ARA.
It was.
Yeah, and so that's what the state of Maine, which is they have pretty useful maps. And one of the things about those maps, I mean, you were talking about Franklin County. The county did a report. They put some money into it. It meant that when we said, okay, we're going after federal funding, you know, there were all these towns that wanted it in Maine, but we went to Franklin County first and looked at doing the entire county because it was so easy given the data that they already gathered. So that has kind of become our model for this sort of support. If we're gonna fund this ourselves, having that sort of support is great. But what's also really helped is the state of Maine maps, and I don't know what the state of New Hampshire is. Now, the received word on the street, Maine has a worse problem than most of New Hampshire, and Vermont has a worse problem. I'm not saying this is true. This is what kind of like when we all get together at the bar and talk about it. You know, it's like Maine's got a big problem. Vermont's got a problem too, and New Hampshire's pretty much, you know, it's not a top of mind the way. I mean, the governor is talking about broadband all the time in Maine. So I don't know what the state level resources that are going into this and whether they would maintain the maps. But it is, again, the role of government traditionally has been to be the people who gather that sort of kind of society-wide data. And the problem that what we've found in working with towns is we're willing to do all the survey and all that, but you call someone up at night and you say, hi, I'm from an ISP and I want to know how fast your internet service is. Click.
So,
whereas if it's a town saying, hey, we've heard complaints about internet service, can you do this for us? Their response rates are literally an order of magnitude greater than if we try to do it as a private entity.
And one of the things that's actually in your favor is we had great luck actually in election cycles where we worked with the town and we actually had a booth at the voting board and with the town.
Card table and a couple of volunteers with clipboards.
We had volunteers, clipboards, we had iPads out, and it's a great place because you interact and they ask questions, but it's also a place where they're coming in with a sense of, okay, I'm coming to vote. So the psychological hurdle to actually engage in a conversation is less, especially when you're with town community members and town leadership at those voting booths. It's an amazing experience because they participate, and you're also saying to them, why are we doing this? So 2020 could be an interesting, November 2020 could be an interesting data gathering.
well, I can say that when they had this I Want Broadband NH initiative, we did it at the library, we promoted it there, which means it's not just an election day, it's every day life is open. We got some pretty good results.
Yes.
We showed people how to do it, and they went home and did it. And so this is important because, you know, you don't like it when it's slow.
Yeah, that's great.
And
Well,
so just to, you know, the
That's awesome.
crowdsourcing can happen a lot of ways.
Yes, absolutely. And the libraries have that credibility that we just can't bring to the table.
Chuck?
Last week I was at Senator Shaheen staff retreat in DC, and my first meeting there was with NTIA, and they were sharing all the information on their new mapping tool, which is kind of interesting hearing what you've just been discussing, because this had 100 layers of data, and it's crowdsourced, a lot of speed test data, data from ISPs, socioeconomic data, so it's all together. And since you are from Maine and you're one of the first 8 states to participate in the pilot round, can you tell me how you will make use of that? And I know it's not for commercial use, it's for policy use, but you're one step away from being able to.
I hear you, and the thing, that I think a key thing, since you're at the federal level, that you'll probably understand that's really sad, is the NTIA stuff is superior, but it's not being used to award funds. They use the FCC data to award funds, so but the FCC is talking about moving much more to the NTIA level. In terms of how the state of Maine is dealing with that, that is being driven by the Connect Me Authority, which is a tiny little state organization that's to promote broadband. And the executive director of that is a very effective and knowledgeable person, Peggy Schaefer, and the details of that, I'd love to set you up with her. So because she's in charge of doing that. And feeding the state, the map, the data gathered by the state of Maine into the NTIA's map.
Carroll?
I just wanted to remind you that, you all, that yes, we have in the state the ability to do these RFIs at the town level, requested by the select board. And it is a precursor to doing any bonding, but they're not necessarily connected to, it doesn't guarantee you're going to do bonding if you do your RFI. The request for information to the existing carriers in your town will yield a baseline. It's going to tell you how many individual homes and premises and at what addresses they can get whatever speed of DSL is available at that address level. It's the same database that's used if you were to call and say, I want broadband at my house, what can I get? That's the same database they use internally from Consolidated Communications. And so you're getting, it starts off being a baseline. Does that mean that I'm supposed to get 10, by the way? Do I get 10 every day of the week? No. But it does tell me that I can get up to 10. And it doesn't say I can get 25, because I can't. And I can't literally get 25. The cable companies are also supposed to respond to that RFI, and there has been some difficulty with that at the state level, so there is some LSRs that are going to hopefully shore that up a bit this time around for that purpose, because the language within the RSA does not say it's imperative that they return that data, or what happens if they don't. And so either it needs to say that they must provide that data, or if they don't provide that data, then we all can assume that you can't get 25.3 at all those locations. And I'm not sure the cable company will want that to be the case, right? They wouldn't want to assume that, because you can only bond in this state for locations that cannot get 25.3. Federal definition, and it's defined as a federal definition. So if that were to go up to 100, then that would also open up that. It's pointing to the FCC definition within the language. So it is important, I think, that we do the RFIs for each town and get that data back, and at least start with that as a baseline that has to be then checked.
Gentleman in the back.
Joe Conner, I'm a Molten Bowl resident. A different vein of thought, rather than the FCC and Chair Pye's renewed efforts on mapping, targeting more the technology side of the issue of why we're all here. Now that the state of New Hampshire, under Senate Bill 103, and it manifested itself in RSA 53A, subsection 2, which, by the way, state that each of the participants of the towns have their own, regarding the statutes, you're going to pay your own way because it's part of the statute. But referring to GWI and recognizing that fiber to the premise is what I actually am hearing, is probably the ultimate in propagation for broadband. I believe GWI in 2016 divested all of its interest to Redstone Wireless. And on the same vein of thought, and from the great work that GWI has done in Maine, some of us have done some research, looking to the future and what Amazon or Microsoft or whatever, the technology changes that I believe you alluded to, not only for broadband speeds, gigabit speeds being terabit speeds in the future as well. What would be GWI's position in would you folks be willing to work and create a hybrid, not just in the trunks? I think I see you might know where I'm going with this, where if you're gonna work with an Amazon or with Microsoft's doing with Interlink down in Texas, Iowa, and whatever, in the small towns for underserved, not unserved, but underserved with the statute in Senate Bill 107, last year, not this year, passed, which in essence has a problem, doesn't address underserved, only addresses unserved, which may be a legal issue here in the state of state of New Hampshire that I believe is being worked. What would be GWI's position if one of the multi-towns, not only in Carroll County, but looking to the future, in the state of New Hampshire, under New Hampshire state law, to work with the towns to say, gee, if they want a hybrid system, try to get FTTP right to the premise, but in some geographies, say here in Moultonborough, there's a mountain or whatever, would you be willing to work with a wireless or a fixed wireless mechanism and to create a work hybrid to introduce that in that town? Thank you for your time, by the way.
The short answer is absolutely. I love the fact that you know about the our selling our wireless to Red Zone. We had bought that about 5 years earlier, and it's like a boat. Your second happiest day of your life is when you buy the boat, and your happiest day is when you sell it. We're absolutely willing to work with people, and that's a model we're actively pursuing. We don't want to do wireless ourselves. One of the fact is wireless is inherently less reliable and slower, just based on physics, than the fiber stuff. And we found it was a real problem for us having a product that was this good and then a problem that was that good, and explain to people why they got the dirty end of the stick when they had wireless, and doing things like a speed guarantee. Well, you can't do a speed guarantee on wireless. Those sorts of things. So, but all those wireless systems require fiber to, like, just as 5G requires fiber to the small cell or the base tower or whatever. We are very happy to be part of the fiber part of the equation, and are actively pursuing, because it's good business, people who do the wireless part, and we'd like to sell them.
Well,
so I agree with Carroll. This takes time and it costs money, but this is what we did. We just said, whatever takes place in Washington is going to be exciting and fun, and we're all going to be thrilled when it happens, period. And that's not to be mean, but I mean, the FCC churns, they churn. I got it, we've all been down there talking about those characters for a while. So what we've done is we've gone out and done the mapping on the wireless side. And we sent out the RFI or Q or whatever the right term is. We voted last week to do that, so we sent them out to Consolidate. And we sent ours to Atlantic Broadband, because we were not served by Spectrum. And they're going to get us something. And we're not going to take it for granted that that's completely accurate. We're going to take then the next step, which is going to be, we're going to crowdsource the data. We know that in the downtown area, if they say it's 100 megabits, it's probably 100 megabits. But when they talk about being on different parts of our town, it's probably not. So we're going to do it step by step, and we're just going to get to the point where we're going to say, pencils down, we got what we got, we know what we got. And that's kind of our approach to this, because I don't think there's any NTIA silver bullet or FCC. I don't think there's any magic wand that gets. I don't think that happens. We're just going to take the data, learn from them, and then crowdsource and get where we are. We should be done with that effort probably in a few months. Never going to know, almost down to the address. Although we got to be careful about talking about where people live and stuff like that. We're a little worried about that. But we'll know down to the street what we have for capacities, and then we'll just go from there.
So you've got that's a really good point. In Maine, we have something that's good and bad, which is the mapping is based on E911.
Right.
And at least for us, in Maine, we use street segments, not addresses. And so we end up with the data, it's fairly fine-grained, but it's street segments, which means you can't say, okay, someone's got that, you take addresses out of it. On the other hand, you can have a situation where it's a long street segment and people have good broadband on one end of the road and they don't on the other.
The next thing that, as you do assessment, the next thing I would recommend we think about, you physically think about what the network should look like. What desired speed you'd love to have. That's kind of the ambition setting. But then when you get down, as you say, Jerry, you want to get in the weeds, you want to get down to, okay, so I want to do a www.amazon.com. How long does it take to get there and get back? So you start doing routes and pings, and you do all the techie stuff. Because at the end of the day, you have a great fiber network, but it doesn't get to where you want to go fast enough. Even though the speeds are awesome, it really doesn't work. So that's something you guys will have to help us with, is pop locations. I'll get technicians of pop locations and access points and how we get on the backbone networks and get out there into the brave world of the internet, and then come back with relevant information. So coaching here, writing down kind of stuff we should learn.
On latency measurements, that's really important, and one of the things that's really fascinating is that the feds are talking about doing that now. And for anyone who gets federal funding, you're going to have to monthly report on speeds at different times of day and latency. And they're defining latency to be, they pick the top 20 kind of tier 1 providers, which used to be called, kind of backbone providers.
Sure.
And you have to measure your speeds to.
BBN was a tier 1.
Yeah. BBN was the only tier 1.
That's right.
You're required, so they measure street latency now as well as gross speeds. And for people in rural areas, if you've ever had to experience satellite, you know why latency can be a problem. You can, in theory, have a lot of bandwidth. But if the latency is low, there's many things you can't use it for.
Right.
Yeah. For me to get email to Steve on the other side of town, it takes almost a day.
That's latency.
I had one other question on your open concept. You said that you make an open connect network. Carroll County started because, I'm going to say this, and please representatives don't take it offensively, but we know New Hampshire is well served from Concord South. If you talk to anybody from Concord North, yes, when they look at New Hampshire, they look at Concord South. So to say that New Hampshire is well served, not as bad as Vermont and Maine, that's true from Concord South. On an open concept, if Carroll County started this with the Open Connect, could that mean that that connection could eventually move up to Berlin, move up to Lancaster, bring more towns in the northern tier so they didn't have to start from scratch like we're doing, but continue to build the network northerly? So you've got a northern.
On top of it, we've had contacts from towns north of us that wanted to be involved in Carroll County.
Well, there's no reason from my perspective that you'd do it on county border. The world's expert on this topic is Carroll, though. You want to talk about what is going on?
Carroll. We have the world's expert here.
Well, I think the question is, at what point is the network too big and is it manageable? So EC Fiber is 23 towns. That's fine at 23 towns, and I think, but when you start having if it were 50 towns, this room, you have to think about this. You've got 50 people sitting around the table making decisions for this organization. Is that too big? That's what we can consider. But as we can see, what's happening in Vermont, though, is these districts, they're called communication union districts, are sort of being started in all areas of Vermont. And so they're not joining EC Fiber to make one big district. They're just creating another district. And since there's a playbook to do that, then it's not as hard as when EC Fiber did it. And so they're able to pull together communication union districts and start looking at that as a district. So if we do Carroll County, and it doesn't have to stop at the border, it's just a district, then they can replicate that in another area of the north, and it can be run and organized by the same, outsourced to the same company.
Yes, that's the key.
To
So,
run it.
it-
So
I guess I
Valley
don't
Net
understand
is
the
going to
open,
run it.
the open access.
I don't think, I think that's different than open access.
Yeah, I don't-
Describe it.
yeah, I don't understand what.
Okay, so the three-ring binder was a very successful open access network. And what three-ring binder did is they said there's dark fiber available to any carrier for a set rate, and everybody's treated equally. And they ended up with close to, the last time I checked, close to 36 different companies of, some of them multinational, some national, regional, and some of them very small. And basically what you say is, you're not going to have access to fiber be the monopoly point. Other that's been tried other places with mixed success. A lot of it is dependent on how the details are run. Carroll's familiar with, and I'm certainly familiar with a New Hampshire project that was called Fast Roads, where it was open access, and I would say it did not work out. Yeah, the early days of Project Utopia and Utah would be another example. And so from our perspective, I think the benefits are still there, but we've modified the model. So we took a page from the way electricity works in Maine, where there's a standard offer. So there's an ISP that commits to sell to everyone at a given price in terms and conditions. And then other ISPs can get on the network, but you've always got someone who's made the commitment to be the standard offer provider. Why I think that model works is, you're going to have service, you know what it's going to be, you're going to know there's a price, you know that everyone who's on the network is going to be able to get service, but at the same time you have at least the specter of competition there to keep people honest, and the ability of the town to, if things get really bad, say, you know what, we're going to bring in other people.
So you get vendor diversity, but you don't necessarily get service diversity.
It depends, absolutely, and it depends, but you certainly don't get route diversity.
Yeah, right.
Because you don't have two sets of fiber, so everybody's using the same route. If a pickup truck takes out that telephone pole, everybody goes down. If you make dark fiber available, different providers are using different equipment, so you get a fair amount of service diversity. And if it's lit service, really the only diversity is in customer support, billing, and marketing. So, but it's a heck of a lot better than no diversity at all, and particularly with the dark fiber. So the prices you have in Maine now for service, and particularly for businesses, are equivalent to what you get in a major metropolitan district.
Hold on.
Call me again. Mine might not be in the same vein of thought. I thought I heard the original question, if you had many towns wanting to join bonds or whatever. For the sake of clarity, I'm suspecting the effort up in the North Country to get Carroll County to get this going. I think most towns know if they want broadband or not, and they're willing to push for it, primary supporter. The bill that was signed by Sununu this year, Senate Bill 103, manifested in RSA 53, basically allows multi-town bonding. But the year before, Senate Bill 170 allows each town. So you don't really need another entity to tell you whether you can join somebody else to create a broadband entity. You could have multiple towns, or at least two towns, on both statutes. This year's statute allows all of you to get together. So now the query about, well, whether you're using dark and light fiber, or first of all, if you're using leased lines from Spectrum or from Atlantic or from Consumer Communication, should be moot. It should be, what do the towns want to do? The state of New Hampshire's finally released the chain. Get the towns moving on. I thank you for your time.
Gary, all right, go ahead, Carol.
I just wanted to comment on it, and maybe it was the same thing that you're going to say, is that, so in this year's legislation, there's a new bill that's going in to look at, take that one step further, to create communication districts, similar to Vermont, but not the same, because New Hampshire's rules are different. And it happens to be, if I have the number here, 20-2811 is the current LSR for that. And so what that will do is allow the towns not only to get together and bond, but really to create an entity like a sewer district or a water district that has its own municipal rights in itself, right? So you can accept federal funds, you can accept investment opportunities, and you can sign contracts, and you can outsource to an entity to operate your network. You can do all of that as a district. So instead of being these towns that have gotten together and then try and split up, okay, you bond for 10 million, and you bond for 3 million, and you bond for 1 million, and who's going to be responsible for what? This creates a district that all of that comes together through one entity called like a municipality, like a water district or a sewer district. And so we saw what we did last year, and the concern was, okay, how does that actually work when each town is now liable, right? In this case, the district is liable.
And, yeah, and Carol, can I ask quickly, yes, so they could do revenue bonds, which
They can do
would
revenue
not
bonds.
backed by the towns.
Yeah.
And,
They can do revenue, the district can do revenue.
the district could do revenue bonds, okay, and would, under New Hampshire rules, would those revenue bonds be treated as municipal bonds with the tax advantages?
Yes.
Not that you need any tax
Yes,
advantages
they
in New
would.
Hampshire, if you did.
Yes, they would.
Okay.
And so, yes, they would, New
All right.
Hampshire doesn't have an income tax, so.
Yeah, so, yeah, right, so, but,
So
so
on a
this is
federal
more of an
basis,
issue
that
for
would
us,
be,
since we have the
that would
highest
be
level
true.
of nation.
So you can all, if you want to take a look at that, we'll talk more about it later, and there'll be some sessions, of course, in the upper, up here to get the legislators together to talk about it, so that we have some broad support for it as it goes through. But I think it's one way to sort of have a meaningful entity that takes responsibility for it as a whole. And that seems to work in other places, and
That's excellent.
I just
And
wanted to-
it shall-
Yeah.
Hopefully that same LSA will come up. It's already been passed under this year's law.
Yeah.
That, I'll quote the statute. Any agreement entered under RSA 53-A subsection 3 shall specify. A town like Multnomah wants to know, we've been a cash cow for a lot of towns. Our governing body, our select board is fantastic. First questions out of their mouths is, who's trying to dip into our pockets? No. And I don't believe that to be the case for this effort. But to your point, it's already established law in the state of New Hampshire. Any agreement entered under RSA 53-A subsection 3 shall specify each participating public agency's proportionate share of the debt represented by any jointly issued bond or note. So we can tell our governing body, our select board, no, you go into these bonds with whomever, the county or any other town, it has to be specified what we as taxpayers are on the hook for. Thank you.
And it's 53, it'll be 53G is what this new language coming up for this year.
Under which statute?
Under
Under 53, RSA 53?
RSA 53.
Yeah, because it stops at D right now.
Yep.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'd just like to say one thing here, even though we only meet once a month or so, okay, Steve, Carroll has been involved, Senator Bradley, Jerry. We have been working on all kinds of things, especially in the legislative hurdles aspect. And we've got 5 pieces of legislation that we're working to get into the process for this year.
Great job.
So, and with that said, Jerry has a question.
A very short foray back into the weeds relative to what Paul was laying out for that time frame of the RFI to the ISPs and then moving on to the crowdsourcing. I guess the question is, could we just move straight to the crowdsourcing? Or should we still proceed along with the RFI to the ISPs, which may take some time, particularly if they refuse and so on? And so I wonder what your thoughts are and what your thoughts are. Could we just move straight to crowdsourcing for the data?
Our view is that we're gonna give them a chance. We did the same thing with the wireless carriers, wrote them a letter and said, here's our maps that we did with you, come visit.
And I think the statute says 2 months, if I recall, 16
Well,
days.
there was no, I don't know what the statute was, we just, we went out and put phones in police cars and mapped all the wireless stuff in town. We sent them out to the carriers, we sent them right to the CEOs and said, here's what we did, come on in and bring your maps and let's have a chat. And we've heard from everyone but for one. Our objective was to give everybody a chance to speak. We're going to do the same. We did the same thing with Consolidated. We did the same thing with Atlantic Broadband. We said we don't have your maps, but we're hearing some stuff. Why don't you come on in and chat with us and tell us if you're going to put capital into our town. That's basically what we asked. So now we send them back these the two landline guys. We send them back this letter, and we're going to give them a chance. And if they don't respond, then you go to Plan B.
When you say we, are you speaking of, what's the we you're speaking about? Your town?
We, the town.
Exactly.
We'll go to Plan B.
But I mean, my concern is with all the different towns, maybe still a longer process. So I'm wondering again about what your thoughts would be.
I think Consolidated is going to be really accommodating.
No.
From what I've heard, they really want to
We
help.
met with Consolidated, and I'll tell you more about it later, right, time permitting. They said they would expedite the information coming to us.
Right, but
We just have to get the select
though.
boards,
Yeah.
we have to get all the select boards to pass a vote, okay, to make the RFI happen. I sent out a copy of the letter that all you gotta do is fill in. Carroll helped us write it and whatnot, and we need the towns to get on the bandwagon and get that done. We've also got the towns working on parcel lots, seeing if we can bypass the 911 information that we have a hard time getting, which we're working on legislation to remedy.
Well, I'm just curious.
Okay, so first of all, for both Atlantic Broadband and Consolidated, if you want them to be responsive, tell them you're talking about us.
Competition is a good thing.
And I don't understand, I don't understand why you wouldn't do them in parallel.
Okay, so do it
Yeah.
parallel. That's the
Yeah,
bottom
sure.
line. So I know parallel's good. Okay.
Yeah.
All good.
Are there any other questions for these gentlemen?
Thank you very much.
All right, now, Steve, you have permission to ask your question.
No, million.
Basically, yes.
You don't have any questions?
I'm good.
Oh, my
This was such a good presentation.
One last question.
All right, Carol?
Because we're getting a lot of we're getting a lot of questions about this in other meetings throughout New Hampshire. Is what do you happen to think about Starlink? Elon Musk's,
Starlink?
low-level satellite.
I think it's gonna be, really interesting to see how it plays out. The fact is, no one, it's not as though anyone's, other than the investors, are dependent on it now. So we'll know a lot more in a year, A. B, if it works out, it's gonna be a really good thing. If nothing else, the level of coverage in places that you just can't hit now would be, I'm gonna take a Starlink whatever when I go hiking. The latency, it's not gonna be like, I think it's like a tiny fraction of the distance. We're talking about a few miles versus, I think it's 70,000 miles of the other satellites. I
You're
think
saying
the number.
23K, so yeah.
Okay, so it is, it's a real, if you're into this sort of thing, you ever hear of Iridium? And that took years, they went bankrupt. At first, because they ran into problems. More communication is better than less, and as we become a network-dependent society, having something, when the Soviets take out the landline network, you want to have a backup.
I think it's also important to realize that their ambitions are not necessarily on the US market. Their ambitions are Africa and Latin America and sections of the Southeast Corridor and the subcontinent.
Yep.
So from a strategic point of view, it makes for a great Elon Musk PR saying, I'm going to launch 10,000 satellites and I'm going to create this network. There's another ambition there. It's a larger, ready-to-go market with purchasing power in those large swaths of the geography. So, you know, if anything, you will see those networks, if and when they do happen, that those areas are going to come online first because they got nothing. And culturally, they already have cell connections.
Correct.
So landline connections.
Yeah, and so I think the subtext I'm hearing, Carroll, is people say, why are we doing this when we can just wait for satellites? My take on that is there are some, for our perspective, there are literally, we have talked to probably close to 200 towns. We've got funding in the pipeline for about 25. And we're planning to send out another, expand that very significantly next year. It's not even worth discussing. There's so many people who want it. You know, the people who are holding off will hold off, and there's no force in the universe more powerful than broadband. So when towns start to get it, the towns nearby will come around.
I have a question.
Sure.
I know that we're really happy that you're here to talk to us about this, and I know we're gonna probably talk to a few other people. I guess I'm wondering, it sounds like you're really busy, and you're really busy in main projects, and it's what you just mentioned about money coming in 25 towns and whatever. I guess I'm wondering, should it be that you are the group that we want to pursue? How long would it take for you to begin to help us, and how long would it take to come to completion?
If we would be, so we've been investing, and we've had some success. So we're in a position where we have been and are building our capacity. So we can start right away. If we pursue federal funding, that can take like a year. If you guys do bonding, it's going to take 2 years. And then once you have the money, it's pretty quick. I think we have the resources to move a little, in some ways, quicker than ValleyNet. Though ValleyNet has gotten very efficient, but in the early days, they had to work things out. There is a problem in New Hampshire that I don't trust in Vermont and Maine, what happened is people started to do this and they learned that the state regulatory apparatus was not supportive. You don't have that, and in both cases, there was a major push, multi-year legislative push. We got the rules changed, the laws changed, the rules changed, and things are better now. Wouldn't you agree?
In Vermont and Maine.
Yes. In New Hampshire, you're nowhere on that.
We're working on it.
Okay, well, good. Well, if you are, so we really want to expand into New Hampshire. We want to get out of Maine. That's one of the reasons I love the ValleyNet board, because it worked really well when they were in Vermont, we were in Maine, and New Hampshire was in the middle. But now ValleyNet's moving into New Hampshire, and we're moving into New Hampshire. They're coming in on the western border, we're coming on the eastern. We get along very well, and we actually cooperate rather than compete. But we're really interested, and we would like to help if you're going to do that. We learned what didn't work, and would love to help if you're going to do something about pole attachments.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
It's pole attachment.
Yeah. So that's so unless we get screwed on pole attachments, it's 18 months.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
All right, we have 20 minutes left to our meeting, and I would like to thank Carroll.
No, thank you for having us.
And I have a question. My briefcase. Oh, it's over there? Okay, good. It got moved around.
Oh, jeez.
Denise is over there rummaging through it as soon as
Be well.
Good job. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for everything.
This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
All right, I have a sign-in sheet here. Is there anybody that heard?
We should, yeah. No, I can.
Please pass it around.
Is anybody who did not sign the signing sheet?
Okay, moving on. Grant updates, we're in the process of feasibility study, gathering information. All of you have been emailed requests to talk to your assessor in your towns to gather lot information on the assessing software, Avatar and whatnot. We also would like a count of your municipal buildings in town, the library, schools, public works, police, fire, that would possibly need internet connections. We've also sent out the request for the RFIs, request for information. We need these requests to go to your Board of Selectmen. They have to be voted on. I sent you sample letters that you can just fill out, put on your letterhead for your town, and send them out. Certified mail is the preferred method. So I'd just like to remind everybody that that needs to be done.
Did Rob give you an address to send it to?
770 Elm Street for Consolidated. I sent,
Yeah, you sent that out.
Albany is Consolidated as well as Spectrum, and I gave one address for Consolidated. It'll go directly to Rob Coster, Vice President of Consolidated. And I gave you 3 addresses to Spectrum. Okay? Yes?
Can I just ask the information from the assessor and the other town information that's not related to our RFA letter, where do we send that?
Send it all to me and I will forward it to Carroll. It was all in that original email that I had sent out. And we have, I believe, 9 towns right now in Carroll County that have replied.
I've only seen 4, so unless you
I
send
know.
lots later.
I've been out of town. They'll be
I was
coming.
just hoping it wasn't lots of mine, no.
No, I'm gonna bombard you probably between now and the weekend. So please, the sooner that all gets done, the better it'll be. We can keep this feasibility study moving forward. As far as updates, as I told you a little earlier, we've been very busy behind the scenes. We've been working with our legislators, with Carroll. A week or so ago, Steve and I went down to the New Hampshire Digital Inequity Summit down at St. Anselm's College. We served on a panel down there. We had a few of you also in attendance. And it's where East Met in New Hampshire. We suffer from similar problems. And we've agreed to cooperate, especially in the legislative area, so that we can get some of these legislative hurdles passed and hopefully help us down the road. Steve met yesterday with the Carroll County Librarians Association, I think is what they, and he had a very, very good conversation with the librarians in Carroll County. On Tuesday, Steve and I met with Rob Coster, who is the Vice President of Consolidated Communications. They are very interested in taking on the entire Carroll County. Had a great hour-and-a-half conversation, a lot of questions. I think that's when Steve ran out of questions.
Only momentarily.
And we have invited him to speak, as we had GWI here today, on December 12th at 10 a.m. And Paul O'Brien, selectman in the town of Wolfboro, is going to host that meeting. And I will be sending out a meeting notice between now and the weekend. Very interesting. I like competition.
Me too.
And it was very, very promising. Have I left anything out with what we've been doing behind the scenes?
Oh, do you want to do the legislative stuff?
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
I'm gonna turn it over to you. You want to deal with it, or you want me to continue?
Well,
All right, we've got
do you want to go over there, because we've already done that, I think, right?
the feasibility study.
Yeah. we've done that.
Yeah, I know, we've got 15 minutes or so,
Yeah.
and I just wanted to make sure we touch base on all the important.
Okay,
So I can send other stuff.
I'll just do it quickly.
Go ahead.
But basically, we spoke at the last meeting about some of the legislative hurdles. We didn't have all of them that are on the list here in your agenda. There's 6. It's already past the House filing time, so I contacted Jeb. He agreed to help with that. Got Bobby Collins from his minority office to start working. He and I worked back and forth to work on drafting of the E911 information and about the issue about broadband, the penalty for providers who fail to provide information under 33G. So we've got those 2 in. The LSRs have been filed. They have not yet come out, so we haven't had a chance to see the final product, but that's underway. And then the polls, communication district, we've already talked about. The polls in the, well, the polls is a separate one. The in lieu of taxes is separate, and then the municipal broadband, we talked about it, I think, a little bit before with Jay Kahn for the bonds. But anyway, so Jeb, though, brought up a very important thing I'd like him to address, and that is that these bills are going to come to hearings. When they come to hearings, to quote Jeb Bradley's line, it's how do you come to yes? It is a matter of getting a coalition of people there to support this. And so we have to think beyond our little county, because we're trying to pass a state bill. So you've got to get involved the other counties. But why don't you speak to that one, Jeb, because this is your specialty. Get into yes.
If you go back a couple of years to the debate about Senate Bill 170 and then Senate Bill 103, it's kind of interesting. 170, the committee recommended killing the bill. That was the one that allowed towns specifically to bond for internet infrastructure. It was overturned on the floor. I mean, it was people like Steve and Rick that had contacted me and said, hey, we really need this, and enough of my fellow senators supported it, and it went, and then it went in the House fairly easily. Last year on 103, it was a little bit different. The cable companies came out of the woodwork after no opposition in the committee hearing, and convinced the chairwoman of the committee to try to table it because, again, Steve and Rick had been all over me. I said, hey, this isn't happening. And it, again, went through, and Jerry worked to get it through the House. So the point I'm making, I think, is some of these changes, and Senator Deitch's bill is the one that Carroll talked about. I expect to be a co-sponsor of it. And I think we'll have a pretty good collection of co-sponsors. But the point is that different organizations need to weigh in, and weigh in a pretty effective way. So all of the towns that are represented here, I suspect most of you are members of the Municipal Association. The Association of Counties need to be involved in this. Those are probably the 2 most important organizations that will advocate on behalf of all the towns and all the counties in the state of New Hampshire. Quite frankly, with the exception of Rockingham County, the problems that we're talking about here exist in all of the other 9 counties, and probably pockets of Rockingham County, maybe Newfields, which happens to be the home of Maggie Hassan and Chris Sanoon. So having those 2 organizations, they need to be priority positions for both the Municipal Association and the Association of Counties. So I think a lot of you are on select boards here. Make sure that that is represented to the Municipal Association and to the counties. Hard to say what the cable companies will do. Maybe you know, now they have started to see, because their opposition was a little bit less on 103 than 170, but I think you better be prepared for having a good turnout at the public hearing, but also making sure that the organizations that, you know, talk to people like Jerry and myself every day, Association of Counties and Municipal Association, are locked in, solid in support.
I always like to publicly thank Senator Bradley for making sure that Senate Bill 103 didn't get tabled in study and was forced to the Senate for a vote, in which passed. And I want to publicly thank you, Senator, for that support.
One thing I'd like to add to what Senator Bradley just mentioned, the New Hampshire Municipal Association, I am on the board of directors, I'm actually their secretary, believe it or not. Margaret Burns and Cordell Johnson last year, when Senate Bill 103 was almost going to be tabled and whatnot, they actually wrote the amending legislation for that finally passed. It went from a sentence about this long to, I think it was 6 pages. So, I mean, the Municipal Association is on board. They were also one of the sponsors for that broadband panel that we sat on down at St. Anthony's College as well. So, but getting the New Hampshire Association of Counties involved, Matt, would you talk to the commissioners and see if we can get them on board as well?
I have one
Becky
other.
was first.
I have one other question, because Senator Bradley, I know a number of bills. Why can't we do a blitz writing campaign as well? Because trying to get people down in Concord, unfortunately, jobs and all that. Can we not elicit our library and our
Absolutely.
websites to?
I mean,
To
people
hit
like-
every legislator,
Yeah,
not just
and
ours?
our emails are all online at the state website, you know, contacting individual House members and senators.
So it would
should
behoove us
absolutely
to
do.
all go back to our towns as well and get
Yes.
our public people on board to blitz.
I will keep you informed and energized, trust me.
I'm energized, I just need the information.
Yeah, one of the
Jerry would
things-
like to say
Our
something.
emails, as Jeff points out, are online, but one of the problems is that we do get blitzed a lot, and it begins to almost be a matter of just delete. So though that does work some, I know that there's a realistic thing if you're getting 150 a day, they all say the same thing, the same form. But once you see the same form multiple times, most people never read it.
Well, that's why I'm wondering about sending an attachment.
But the other thing, though, again, it's that the hearings do matter. We don't have to all be there. It's going to be key to have someone like Rick there, or Steve. It's going to be key, as we said, to have the Association of Counties, Municipal Association. Those people need to be engaged. They'll come with written material, they'll hand out. Committee members pay attention to that, generally. That's the one that's going to really get the ear, because if you can get that through the committee, then when it's time to go into the various caucuses, they're going to be able to explain to the members, you know, this is a good thing, and we think you should try to vote for it, which sways a lot of people. So we do want to put a lot of energy into getting the right people down there to do the testimony, but it doesn't have to be all of us.
Well, I would like to see the school districts go down, because I'm going to use Conway for an example. Not too long ago, I think the Conway representatives are here? No.
No, they couldn't make it.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, if you read, they just found out that their school is no longer covered by the Spectrum freebie of we'll do your televisions in school. They
Right.
now have to pay for every box that's in every classroom, which is ridiculous. So I'd also think we could use the schools to say what a great advantage this would be.
Schools, the libraries too.
Kevin Richards, SB9, is fully supportive and has told us anything that he can do, he will help and support.
But maybe we can send something out to all 3 districts that we haven't, well, 4, I think, in this area.
Steve and I went down and we spoke in person to the Governor Wentworth School District.
Yep.
But I mean, get
And
their
we-
letters of support in, like the Municipal Association, the Association of Counties, get the libraries and the schools giving a letter of support that.
Maybe them to come down to
Correct.
testify, the school's organization, not just necessarily one.
Just
Right.
one piece of advice, don't retire.
No, I don't.
No, you're exactly right. I'm not sure there's an association of librarians.
Yes,
Yes, there is.
Their support would be helpful, and when I talked about counties and municipal association, I should have mentioned the Association of New Hampshire School Boards.
Yeah.
Because they would be another,
Yeah.
top flight
Yeah.
organization that is gonna do
And then you
exactly
can-
what you said.
I'm gonna do one more, the New Hampshire Medical Association, because
Yes.
telemedicine is
Yes.
here, many of our people can't use it, so I think if we could get somebody from the.
Yes, I can handle that.
I love volunteers.
So-
Glenn, you had a question.
I was going to add another organization that you might want to be thinking about for support, and that's the Association of Regional Planning Commissions.
Oh, yeah.
Because they touch all the communities in the state. There are 9 individual ones, but they have an association that advocates for issues and advocates on behalf of the planning commissions. And it's not a direct tie to some of the things that they do, but it's very much a part of the of their planning efforts and regionalism and all of that.
First responders.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we want is we want somebody to be able to make a 911 call. First responders, so maybe, police chiefs, fire chiefs. I'll go look on that one on my side.
So I've had several questions come to me about the districts and why we need them and what the purpose of this legislation is. And I think that one thing that was brought to my attention that I didn't really think much about at the time is that many of you small towns don't have water districts or sewer districts, and so you might not know what that entails. And so it was suggested that we do some educational outreach in these areas, not just in conference, but before we get to that point of needing someone to testify to make sure that these associations, as well as individuals and select boards and so on, understand what we're talking about when we talk about communication district and why it's needed.
We met at that summit, we met with all our counterparts in the western part of the state, Chesterfield, Lyme, who else did I miss over there? But we've all agreed that we're gonna support each other in all this legislation.
Yeah.
Because 2 of the pieces of legislation were recommended by them that we did get filed.
That was the time, Bristol.
And
Yes.
Nick from Bristol and whatnot. So,
That's the thing we really want to be sure, you really understand. Carroll County is not alone in this. This comment has been made. This is much of New Hampshire. And we need to be reaching out on a continual basis to those other parts, areas of New Hampshire, as Senator Bradley has suggested. The votes can be there, and we cannot carry this fight alone, but we're all in that same boat. And the thing is to reach out to these others and gather that support at the legislative level.
and we can do a lot better in numbers.
Yep.
I mean, that's why I think we're getting the recognition and whatnot that we're getting is because we're doing it as a large group. We're getting people's attention, and we're serious. Yes, the gentleman on that.
Yes, sir. Just clarification on the same on possible legislation changes. Will the term unserved versus underserved be addressed as, for instance, the House Bill 170, it only targets the word unserved, which has a FCC definition. The statute stipulates FCC definition, but nowhere, I mean, all the discussions about mapping and speeds become almost moot if you don't address what does underserved mean. We've got University of New Hampshire, but I haven't heard anybody talk about University of New Hampshire. We've got the guy there that invented cable modem sitting on the coast. He's running the Center of Excellence for Broadband. I haven't heard his name used yet in any of your documentation. The guy's a PhD. He invented the cable box. He's right there, UNH.
We spoke with him.
Broadband.
We had him at one of our first.
Did you? Well, I appreciate that, but
No,
I'm not.
I mean, this is where a lot of this.
I can't live without broadband, but when I don't see underserved there, I'm getting 120 minutes on the broadband.
I've brought that term up several times. and
Yeah, I don't see it in the statute though.
It will bring the cable companies and communication companies out of the woodwork to beat down.
But it'll bring the lawyers out of the woodwork as soon as the town says we're gonna pass a bond that says we're gonna go ahead and try to get anything below 25 MIPS.
With regard to, SB 103 that was passed last year, okay, and the wording that you brought up, what happens after that 2 months? We're trying to rectify that at this point. Do you penalize them? No, they're gonna take you to court and just thumb their nose at you and say, take us to court.
Exactly.
No, let's hit them where it hurts,
Okay.
okay? I believe the legislation that's being
It
proposed.
just declares it unserved.
Yeah.
Okay, as long as it's, I thank you for your time and effort, by the way.
We move forward.
And I think that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when we were doing GTOP and all the ARA money was flowing, unserved had a definition of no service or just satellite service, or no other broadband or internet access besides that. And underserved had a definition of, at one point, of under 4.1, and then it was 10.1, and so on. So now I think that we're headed towards this thought process that if you don't get the federal definition of broadband, you are unserved. And so there's no underserved anymore. You're just unserved if you don't get at least 25.3.
The FCC is addressing both terms. At this date, Chairman Powell just this past week.
Is trying to.
Exactly. We had 60 more satellites launched Monday.
Right.
Right? And here we are talking about fiber to the house.
Yeah.
I rest my case, no pun intended. Lawyers will get involved, almost guaranteed.
I'm up for the fight.
When I was on the broadband committee here in town about 10 years ago, we had that same discussion. How can we get the town to get broadband? There was discussion, what do we mean by broadband? Very familiar with the terms. And I still don't see much discussion. Finally see statutes, which is the only regulated piece of paper. Everything else is moot. Until you have a statute written and approved by the state legislature, it's all wind. I apologize for being brusque.
No, that's what we need. Competition. All right, last question.
Last question, it concerns our scribe or our clerk. Are we going to leave this as the clerk, or are we?
Are you volunteering?
No, I
would.
No, should we take the name off so people don't send stuff that we might get
Trying to get a hold
to?
of him. I don't know what's going on.
Well, that's why I say, can we scratch, I'll make a motion that we scratch him temporarily, because I'm concerned that information might get lost if it goes to the clerk that's not been at our
I didn't
meetings.
pick it up.
It's all, everything's gone through you.
I know, but when the paperwork comes out,
Yeah.
it's still listed as
Okay.
the clerk, is what I'm saying. Can we take it off as clerk so that we
I will
don't
take
lose
it off.
information?
Yeah,
Thank
take it
you.
off this part, yeah.
Just remember, we're gonna have a meeting in December. It's gonna be on the 12th of December. It's a Thursday, it's at 10 a.m., which is what everybody decided a few meetings ago. Paul O'Brien has been kind enough to arrange with the town of Wolfboro, and we're gonna have it there at the town hall. Please put it on your schedules. It's 4 weeks out, so we have plenty of time. And if there's any people, we're not gonna have any meetings after that, probably after the holidays. If there's any other town that would like to host a meeting, please let me know. We get standing offers from the county offices down at the county in Ossipee, and we've had an open invitation at the Economic Council in Conway as well. But I personally enjoy coming to all the towns to see what all the towns are about. Yes, Ellen?
I think she had her hand up first, but.
Oh, we could approve the minutes for the last meeting.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Motion to accept the minutes of the October 7th meeting.
Hold on, the secretary's still going over.
Motion's been made and seconded.
All right,
Any
any
discussion?
discussion, errors, or omissions? Hearing none, I'll call it to vote. Everybody in favor of approving the minutes of the last meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No roll call?
No roll call, please.
Second.
Yep.
What's that?
You made a motion to adjourn, I
You
said.
don't need it as one.
I got one piece of information here.
What's that?
All right.
Last week, Becky Mason forwarded to Rick and myself an email that she had gotten from Senator Deitch, from a Jed Pressgrove, who is with Government Technology Magazine in California. And apparently he had heard about our activity out in California, and he wanted to talk to somebody here about what was going on. I called him. We had a very nice talk. Government Technology Magazine has a national circulation of 77,000 that goes to local governments and so forth. And when we were hanging up after the interview, I said, any chance of getting a copy of the article you're going to be submitting? He says, yes. And he did email it to me, which I will forward to it. He measures our activity here in Carroll County, how it's kind of the forefront of what is going on in New Hampshire and other parts of the country. We have national recognition of what we're doing.
Right, and then the last thing I would like to say is I'd like to thank Bill Gaston from the town of Bolton Borough.
And we hope you all have a great Thanksgiving.
And I will call us adjourned.
Does anybody still need to sign up?
Who do I give this to?
I know.
Here we go.
I do run a sewer commission.